The mahogany gavel slammed down, echoing like a gunshot through the silent courtroom. But it wasn't as loud as the laughter coming from the defense table. Derek Winslow leaned back in his leather chair, smoothing the lapels of his $3,000 suit, and smirked at the woman he had promised to love forever. "Face it, Audrey," he sneered, his voice carrying clearly to the gallery. "You were a banned investment. You're nothing but a frantic gold digger trying to claw at scraps you didn't earn. Take the settlement and disappear, or I'll leave you with absolutely nothing but the clothes on your back." The stenographer typed furiously. The gallery whispered. Audrey Keating didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply adjusted her glasses, looked at the digital clock on the wall, and smiled. Because Derek didn't know that in exactly 3 minutes, the gold digger he was mocking would become the owner of the very building he was standing in. The Superior Court of Seattle was cold, sterile, and smelled faintly of floor wax and despair. For Audrey Keating, it felt like the inside of a coffin. She sat alone at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded neatly on top of a battered file folder that contained the sum total of her defense, receipts for grocery bills, tuition payments for Derek's MBA, and the lease for the tiny apartment they had shared 6 years ago. On the other side of the aisle, it was a different world. Derek Winslow, the CEO of Winslow Tech and the city's newest darling of the venture capital world, was surrounded by a phalanx of attorneys. His lead counsel, Mr. Giles, was a man known as the Shark in legal circles, a man who cost more per hour than Audrey had made in the last year. "Your Honor," Mr. Giles boomed, standing up and buttoning his jacket. He didn't look at Audrey. He looked through her, as if she were a smudge on a window pane. "This dragging out of proceedings is frankly insulting. Mr. Winslow has been more than generous. He has offered Ms. Keating a lump sum of $10,000 and a temporary spousal support arrangement of $500 a month for 6 months. Considering she contributed nothing to the creation of Winslow Tech, and considering the pre-nuptial agreement, which, I might add, she signed willingly, we believe this is charity, not an obligation." The magistrate, a stern woman named Justice Pendergast, peered over her spectacles. "Miss Keating, your representation is still absent?" "I am representing myself, Your Honor," Audrey said. Her voice was quiet but steady. She wore a simple grey dress she had bought at a thrift store 3 years ago. It was clean, but the fabric was worn at the elbows. Derek snorted loud enough for the microphone to catch it. He leaned over to Giles and whispered something that made the lawyer chuckle. "Very well." Justice Pendergast sighed, clearly bored. "Mr. Giles, continue." "Thank you. The narrative Ms. Keating is trying to spin, that she was the muse or the support system behind my client's success, is a fabrication," Giles said, pacing the floor. "The reality is simple. While Mr. Winslow was working 18-hour days coding the algorithms that would revolutionize data security, Ms. Keating was at home. She claims she was managing the household. We call it freeloading." Audrey felt the heat rise in her cheeks. She remembered those days differently. She remembered working double shifts at a diner to pay their rent because Derek refused to get a menial job that would distract him from his genius. She remembered editing his pitch decks until her eyes burned. She remembered holding him when he cried after his first 3 rejections from investors. "I worked 2 jobs," Audrey said, interrupting the lawyer. "I paid for the server space he used to host the first prototype." "Allegedly," Giles shot back. "We have seen no bank statements to prove this. Just handwritten notes in a diary. Inadmissible hearsay." Derek stood up then. He didn't ask for permission. He just stood, radiating the arrogance of a man who had made his first million at 25 and his first billion at 30. "Let's cut the act, Audrey," Derek said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're embarrassing yourself. You want credit for my work? You want half my company? You can't even balance a checkbook. You're a small-town girl who got lucky marrying me. And now that the ride is over, you're trying to cash out. It's pathetic." He turned to the gallery, where a few reporters were scribbling notes. "She calls herself a partner. I call her a liability. I'm offering the settlement to make her go away, Your Honor. Not because she deserves a dime." "Mr. Winslow, sit down," the justice warned, though she didn't bang her gavel. She seemed swayed by his confidence. Wealth had a way of making rudeness look like authority. "I'll sit," Derek said, smoothing his tie. "But let the record show, I built this empire, alone, and I won't let a bitter ex-wife dismantle it, because she's too lazy to get a job." Audrey looked down at her hands. The ring finger of her left hand was bare, but the pale band of skin where her wedding ring had been was still visible. He had taken the ring back, too. He claimed it was a family heirloom, though she knew he had bought it at a pawn shop. "Do you have a counter-proposal, Ms. Keating?" the justice asked, checking her watch. "Or shall I rule on the motion to dismiss your claim for equity?" Audrey took a deep breath. She reached into her battered folder. She didn't pull out a receipt. She pulled out a single, heavy envelope made of cream-colored linen paper, sealed with a crest of red wax. "I don't have a counter-proposal regarding the $10,000, Your Honor," Audrey said softly. "I have a motion to introduce new evidence regarding the ownership of the marital assets." "New evidence?" Giles scoffed. "What is it? A coupon for a discount at the grocery store?" "No," Audrey said. She stood up. She wasn't tall, but in that moment her posture shifted. The slumped shoulders of the defeated housewife vanished. She stood with the straight spine of a soldier or a queen. "It is a deed of transfer." "Transfer of what?" Derek asked, looking bored. Audrey looked him dead in the eye. "Transfer of the intellectual property rights for the core algorithm of Winslow Tech. And the transfer of the mortgage for this courthouse." The room went silent. Even the stenographer stopped typing. "Excuse me?" Justice Pendergast frowned. "Did you say this courthouse?" "Yes, Your Honor," Audrey said, her voice ringing clear. "But before we get to that, I think we need to address who exactly Derek Winslow is. And more importantly, who I am. To understand the silence in the courtroom, you have to understand the noise of the last 10 years. Audrey hadn't always been Audrey Keating, the quiet housewife. 10 years ago, she was Audrey Sinclair, a name that would have opened every door in New York City had she chosen to use it. But she had run away from the Sinclair legacy, a family of ruthless oil tycoons and shipping magnates who viewed their children as chess pieces rather than people. She had wanted to be loved for herself, not her net worth. So, she changed her name, moved to Seattle and became a waitress. That was where she met Derek. He was charming then. He was hungry. He sat in her section of the diner every night, ordering the cheapest coffee and typing furiously on a laptop held together with duct tape. He told her about his vision for a digital future. He told her he was going to change the world. She fell in love with his passion. She didn't tell him she had a trust fund that could buy the entire city block. She wanted to build something real. Flashback to 5 years ago. Their small, drafty apartment. "We can't make rent, Audrey," Derek had said, his head in his hands. "The investors passed. Again. They say the code is unstable." Audrey had walked over to him, massaging his shoulders. She looked at the screen. She wasn't just a waitress. She had a double degree in mathematics and computer science from MIT, another secret she kept from the world, and mostly from Derek. He knew she was good with numbers. But he never asked for the details. His ego was too fragile to accept that his girlfriend might be smarter than him. "Move over," she had whispered. "What, Audrey? I don't have time for—" "Just move over, Derek." She had sat down and spent 6 hours rewriting his kernel. She streamlined the data compression. She patched the security holes. When she was done, the code ran 40% faster. When Derek woke up the next morning and saw the results, he didn't ask how she did it. He just hugged her and screamed, "I did it! It works! I finally cracked it!" She let him say, "I." She let him take the credit. Because they were partners. They were married. What was his was hers. But as the money started rolling in, the us became me. First it was the late nights. Then the separate bank accounts, for tax purposes. Then the assistant, Bianca, a leggy blonde with a degree in marketing and a talent for making Derek feel like a god. 6 months ago, Audrey had come home to find her bags packed by the door. "It's not working, Audrey," Derek had said, sipping a scotch she had bought him for his birthday. "We've grown apart. I need a partner who understands my world. You're just happy being a housewife. You don't have the drive." "I wrote the code, Derek," she had said quietly. "The code that got you the Series A funding. I wrote it while you were asleep." He had laughed, a cold, cruel laugh. You fixed a few typos. Don't delude yourself. You're a waitress I saved from poverty. Sign the papers or I'll destroy you in court." She had signed nothing. She had left, but she didn't go back to the diner. She made a phone call. "Grandfather," she had said into the phone, her voice trembling for the first time in years. "It's Audrey. I'm coming home, and I need the family lawyers." Arthur Sinclair, a man known to make grown senators weep, had simply said, "It's about time, darling. We'll send the jet." Back in the present, inside the courtroom, the atmosphere had shifted from boredom to confusion. Derek was looking at his lawyer, Giles. "What is she talking about? What deed?" Giles stood up, looking flustered. "Your Honor, this is theatrical nonsense. Ms. Keating is clearly suffering from a delusion. We ask that she be removed." "I have the documents right here," Audrey said, walking forward. She handed the heavy envelope to the bailiff, who passed it to Justice Pendergast. The justice opened the seal. She pulled out a document, thick with stamps and signatures. She adjusted her glasses. She read the first page, then the second. Her eyes widened. She looked up at Audrey, then at Derek, then back at the document. "Mr. Giles," the justice said, her voice tight. "Are you aware of the holding company known as Sinclair Vanguard International?" Giles paled. Everyone knew Sinclair Vanguard. They were the silent giants of the global economy. They owned shipping lines, real estate empires, and massive tech portfolios. "Yes, Your Honor," Giles stammered, "but I fail to see the relevance." "The relevance," the justice said, "is that this document states that the land upon which the Winslow Tech headquarters is built was purchased 3 weeks ago by a subsidiary of Sinclair Vanguard, and the lease has been terminated." Derek jumped up. "What? That's impossible. We have a 99-year lease." "Subject to a clause regarding ownership change of the parent managing firm," Audrey said calmly. "You didn't read the fine print of your building contract, Derek. You were too busy picking out the marble for your private bathroom." "Who are you?" Derek whispered, the color draining from his face. "How did you get Sinclair Vanguard involved?" Audrey took a step closer to the railing. She removed her glasses. Her eyes, usually soft, were now hard as diamonds. "You called me a gold digger, Derek. You said I was a small-town girl trying to claw at your scraps," she said, her voice filling the room. "But you never asked about my maiden name. You never asked why I never invited my parents to the wedding. My name is not Audrey Keating. Keating was my grandmother's name." She paused for effect. "My name is Audrey Sinclair, sole heiress to the Sinclair fortune. And as of this morning, I am the majority shareholder of the venture capital firm that funded your company." Derek froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "And," Audrey continued, a small, cold smile playing on her lips, "I'm rejecting your settlement offer." The silence in the courtroom following Audrey's revelation was heavy, the kind of silence that precedes a natural disaster. Justice Pendergast was the first to move. She adjusted her spectacles, picking up the deed Audrey had placed on the bench with the reverence one might handle a live grenade. "Mr. Giles," the justice said, her voice dropping an octave, losing all traces of its earlier impatience. "Are you prepared to dispute the validity of a property transfer certified by the Sinclair Vanguard Legal Department?" Giles, the shark, looked as though he had swallowed a fishing hook. He was sweating profusely, a bead of perspiration trickling down his temple and disappearing into his starch-collared shirt. He knew the name Sinclair. Every lawyer in the state knew the name. "You didn't fight the Sinclairs. You apologized to them and hoped they didn't buy your law firm just to fire you. Your Honor, this is unexpected," Giles stammered, shuffling his papers, which now seemed woefully inadequate. "My client was under the impression that Ms. Ms. Sinclair, was destitute. This concealment of assets is surely grounds for a mistrial, or at least a sanction for bad faith." "Bad faith?" Audrey interrupted. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. She turned her gaze from the judge to Derek, who was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. "Let's talk about bad faith, Derek. Let's talk about the pre-nuptial agreement." Derek blinked, his mind racing to catch up. "The prenup? You signed it. You agreed to it. It says what's mine is mine, and what's yours is yours. You get nothing." "Exactly," Audrey said, a dangerous glint in her eye. "You insisted on the strictest separation of assets possible. Clause 4, Section B. Neither party shall have any claim to the assets, inheritance, or future earnings of the other, regardless of the duration of the marriage. You hired 3 lawyers to draft that clause to protect your first $1 million. She took a slow step toward him. "You were so terrified I was after your money. You built an ironclad wall between our finances. And now, that wall is the only thing stopping you from accessing the Sinclair fortune. You played yourself, Derek." Derek's face went from pale to a mottled shade of red. He realized the magnitude of his error. If he had just married her without the prenup, as she had originally wanted, he would be entitled to half of a multi-billion-dollar estate. Instead, he had legally locked himself out of a kingdom to protect a sandbox. "This is a lie," Derek hissed, standing up again, ignoring his lawyer's frantic gestures to sit down. "You're lying. You're not a Sinclair. You worked at a diner. I saw your apartment. You wore cheap shoes. You clipped coupons." "I wanted a real life," Audrey said, her voice tinged with a sadness that made the courtroom hold its breath. "I wanted to know that the man who loved me, not the checkbook my father holds. And for a while, I thought you did. I was willing to live in that drafty apartment forever, Derek. I was happy there, until you decided that money was more important than loyalty." The doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a forceful thud. 3 men in immaculate charcoal suits walked in. They moved with the synchronized precision of a hit squad. Leading them was a man with silver hair and eyes like flint, Sebastian Cross, the head of legal for the Sinclair family. He carried a briefcase that looked like it cost more than Derek's car. "Apologies for the interruption, Your Honor," Sebastian said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "I am Sebastian Cross, representing Ms. Sinclair. I'm here to formally file a countersuit against Mr. Winslow for intellectual property theft, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty." "Countersuit?" Derek laughed nervously. "For what?" Sebastian didn't even look at Derek. He walked straight to the plaintiff's table, placed his briefcase down, and snapped it open. "For the theft of the Helios algorithm," Sebastian stated. "The core code that powers Winslow Tech. Our forensic analysis of the metadata proves that the original source code was written on a device registered to Audrey Sinclair 3 years prior to Mr. Winslow's patent filing. Ms. Sinclair allowed Mr. Winslow to use it under the implied contract of their marriage partnership. Since Mr. Winslow has declared that partnership void and claimed sole credit, he is now in possession of stolen property." Sebastian handed a thick binder to the judge and another to a trembling Giles. "We are also filing for an immediate injunction," Sebastian continued, "freezing all assets of Winslow Tech until the ownership of the IP is resolved. As of this moment, Mr. Winslow, you cannot sell, trade, or move a single penny from your company accounts." Derek looked at Giles. "Do something. Tell them they can't do that." Giles closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Mr. Winslow, if this evidence is real, they can do exactly that. It's a standard aggressive maneuver in high-stakes IP litigation." "High stakes?" Derek roared. "She was washing dishes when I met her. And you were begging for change to pay for server hosting," Audrey cut in, her voice sharp. "I wrote the Helios code, Derek. I fixed the kernel panic that was crashing your demo. I optimized the database. You know it. I know it. And now, the metadata knows it." Justice Pendergast looked through the binder Sebastian had provided. She looked up, her expression severe. "Mr. Giles, this evidence is substantial. The timestamps on these code commits predate your client's patent application by 6 months. I am granting the temporary injunction." The gavel banged. It sounded like a death knell. "Court is adjourned pending a preliminary hearing on the IP theft," the justice declared. Derek stood frozen as the room began to bustle. Reporters who had been dozing in the back were now furiously typing on their phones, sensing the viral story of the year. "Tech mogul versus billionaire heiress." Audrey turned to leave. Sebastian Cross flanked her, acting as a shield. "Audrey!" Derek lunged toward her, grabbing her arm. Before he could tighten his grip, a security guard stepped forward, but Audrey held up a hand. She turned to look at her ex-husband one last time in that room. "Audrey, wait," Derek said, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "Look, baby, we can talk about this. We were stressed. The divorce. It got messy. But we're a team. You said it yourself. We're partners." Audrey looked at his hand on her arm, then up at his eyes. There was no love there, only panic. He wasn't missing his wife. He was missing his safety net. "We aren't partners, Derek," she said softly. "You fired me, remember? You said I was a bad investment." She pulled her arm away, brushing the fabric of her thrift store dress as if he had dirtied it. "I'm just liquidating my assets." She turned and walked out of the double doors. As she stepped into the hallway, flashes of cameras erupted like lightning. Derek was left standing alone at the defense table, the shark, Giles, packing up his briefcase with the speed of a man fleeing a sinking ship. "Mr. Winslow," Giles said, snapping his case shut. "My firm will be withdrawing from this case. We have a conflict of interest policy regarding the Sinclair family." "You can't leave me," Derek shouted. "I pay you a fortune." "You paid me," Giles corrected, "but your accounts are frozen. Good luck, Mr. Winslow." The drive from the courthouse to the Winslow Tech headquarters in downtown Seattle usually took 20 minutes. Derek made it in 10, weaving his Porsche through traffic like a madman. He needed to get to the servers. He needed to scrub the metadata. He needed to talk to the board of directors before the news broke. He didn't know that the news traveled faster than a Porsche. When he pulled up to the sleek glass building, a building he had been so proud of, a symbol of his rise from poverty, he saw the trucks. Not moving trucks, but black SUVs with tinted windows. And standing by the revolving doors were 2 security guards he didn't recognize. They wore uniforms with a discreet crest, Sinclair Vanguard Security. Derek stormed up to the doors, his keycard in hand. He slapped it against the reader. Beep, beep. Access denied. What the hell? Derek muttered. He slapped it again. Access denied. Open the door, Derek screamed, pounding on the glass. The receptionist, a young woman named Sarah, who usually greeted him with a terrified smile, was nowhere to be seen. Instead, a large man, with a neck the size of a tree trunk, stepped out from the interior. Mr. Winslow? The guard asked politely. I'm the CEO of this company. Open this damn door. I'm afraid your security clearance has been revoked, pending the emergency board meeting, the guard said. However, you are expected upstairs. I can escort you. Revoked? Who revoked it? I own 51% of the voting shares. Derek spat. Not anymore, sir. Please follow me. The guard opened the door. Derek stormed past him, marching toward the elevators. His mind was spinning. 51%. I have 51%. They can't vote me out. Unless... He thought about the venture capital funding. When Winslow Tech was struggling last year, he had taken a massive injection of cash from a shadowy firm called Apex Capital. They had been silent partners, taking 20% equity, but demanding a seat on the board they never used. He reached the top floor, the executive suite. The air conditioning was humming, but the atmosphere was suffocating. He saw his assistant, Bianca, standing by the conference room door. She looked pale. Bianca! Derek barked. What is going on? Why is my keycard dead? Get legal on the phone. Bianca didn't jump to obey. She looked at him with wide, fearful eyes. She was holding a box of her personal belongings. I can't, Derek, she whispered. I've been let go. Let go? By whom? By the new chairwoman, Bianca said, her voice trembling. She's inside. Derek shoved past Bianca and threw open the double oak doors of the boardroom. The long mahogany table was full. The board of directors, men and women Derek had handpicked for their loyalty and lack of spine, sat in silence, looking down at their tablets. At the head of the table, in the chair that had been custom-molded for Derek's back, sat Audrey. She had changed. Gone was the grey thrift store dress. She was wearing a tailored white power suit that looked sharp enough to cut glass. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek bun. She looked every inch the billionaire heiress she was. Standing behind her was Sebastian Cross. You, Derek seethed, pointing a shaking finger at her. Get out of my chair. Sit down, Derek, Audrey said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried an authority he had never heard before. It was the voice of someone who owned the air he was breathing. I will not sit down. This is a hostile takeover. It's illegal. Actually, spoke up Preston, the company's CFO, a man Derek had known since college. Preston looked terrified. It's technically legal, Derek. Derek whipped his head around. Et tu, Preston? How? I have the majority shares. You had diluted shares, Audrey corrected him, tapping a manicured finger on the polished table. When you took the funding from Apex Capital, you signed a convertible note. If the company's valuation dropped below a certain threshold, their debt converted to equity. Preferred equity, with super voting rights. The valuation hasn't dropped, Derek argued. "We posted record profits last quarter." "That was before the injunction," Sebastian Cross interjected smoothly. "2 hours ago, when the court froze your assets due to the IP theft allegations, Winslow Tech's credit rating plunged to junk status. The bank called in the loans. The valuation tanked." Audrey smiled, a cold, predatory smile. "And Apex Capital, which, surprise, is a wholly owned subsidiary of Sinclair Vanguard, exercised its option. I now control 60% of the voting stock." Derek slumped into the nearest empty chair. It felt like the floor had opened up beneath him. It was a trap set months, maybe years ago. "You set me up," Derek whispered. "You planned this." "I planned for a contingency," Audrey said. "I hoped I would never have to use it. I hoped that the man I married wasn't a narcissist who would try to leave me on the street with $500 a month. But you forced my hand, Derek." She picked up a document from the table and slid it across to him. "This is your severance package." Derek stared at the paper. "Severance? You can't fire me. I am the founder." "You are the alleged founder," Audrey corrected, "pending the investigation into the stolen code. But the board has voted. Effective immediately, you are removed as CEO for gross misconduct and reputational damage to the firm." Derek looked around the table. "Preston, Sarah, anybody?" No one met his eyes. They all knew where the power lay now. They all knew who signed the paychecks. "Read the offer, Derek," Audrey said. Derek looked at the paper. His eyes scanned the legal jargon until they landed on the number at the bottom. Total severance, $10,000. Derek's head snapped up. $10,000? Is this a joke? "It's the exact amount you offered me in court this morning," Audrey said, her voice deadly serious. "I thought it was... How did your lawyer put it? Charity, not an obligation." Derek crumbled the paper in his fist. "I built this. You can't do this to me." "I can, and I did." Audrey stood up. The board members instinctively straightened in their chairs. "Security will escort you out. You are not to take any electronic devices. Your car has been repossessed by the company leasing agency, as it was a corporate perk. I believe there is a bus stop 2 blocks over." Derek looked at her, searching for the woman who used to rub his feet after a long day, the woman who made him soup when he was sick. She was gone. Or perhaps she was never really there. Perhaps he had been too blind to see the tiger hiding in the grass. He looked at Bianca, who was still standing by the door, clutching her box. "Bianca," Derek said, his voice cracking. "Call an Uber. Let's go." Bianca looked at Derek, then at Audrey. She saw the white suit, the power, the billions. Then she looked at Derek, sweaty, fired, and broke. "Actually," Bianca said, her voice icy, "I think I'll stay. Ms. Sinclair said she might have an opening in the mailroom. I need the health insurance." The room went silent. The betrayal was absolute. "Get him out of here," Audrey commanded to the guards. 2 large hands gripped Derek's arms. He didn't fight. He was too in shock. As they dragged him out of the boardroom, he looked back over his shoulder. Audrey was already turning to Preston, discussing the quarterly projections, not even watching him leave. He was a footnote in his own history. But as Derek was thrown out onto the sidewalk, clutching his crumpled severance offer, he felt a surge of rage replace the shock. He wasn't done. He knew something Audrey didn't. The code, the Helios code. It had a back door, a kill switch he had installed just in case. If he couldn't have the company, no one would. He reached into his pocket for his phone, then realized with horror that the guards had confiscated it. He stood on the curb, the rain starting to fall in the grey Seattle afternoon, realizing he didn't even have a quarter to make a call. But he saw a figure watching him from across the street. A man in a trench coat, smoking a cigarette. A man Derek recognized from his old life. A corporate spy named Silas, who Derek had used to sabotage competitors in the early days. Derek smiled, a manic, desperate smile. The war wasn't over. It was just getting dirty. Rain lashed against the neon sign of the Emerald City Internet Cafe, a dingy basement establishment 3 miles from the pristine glass tower of Winslow Tech. It was the kind of place that didn't ask for ID and accepted cash for everything. Derek sat in a corner booth, the hood of his wet jacket pulled low. His $3,000 suit was rumpled and stained with mud from when he had tripped running to the bus stop. Beside him sat Silas, a man with a complexion like grey putty and fingers stained yellow from nicotine. "Are you sure this works?" Derek snapped, his leg bouncing nervously. "If they trace this back to us—" "Relax, boss," Silas rasped, typing on a ruggedized laptop. "I've routed the signal through servers in Estonia, Panama, and a basement in Thailand. It's a ghost signal. Now, give me the access key." Derek reached into his memory. He didn't need a notebook. The kill switch code was the date of his first big sale, followed by his own initials backwards. It was a narcissistic password for a narcissistic failsafe. "Enter this sequence. 0412 MKDL Omega," Derek whispered. Silas's fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard. "Accessing Helios core. Bypassing primary firewall. We're in." On the screen, lines of green code began to cascade like a waterfall. "Okay," Derek said, a cruel grin spreading across his face. "Initiate the wipe command. I want every server formatted. I want every backup corrupted. If I can't be the CEO, Audrey is going to be the queen of a pile of ashes." "Executing," Silas said. He hit the enter key with a flourish. High above the city, in the server control room of Winslow Tech, the mood was surprisingly calm. Audrey stood before the massive wall of monitors, a cup of herbal tea in her hand. Beside her was the company's new chief information officer, a brilliant young woman named Raji, whom Derek had kept in the basement IT support because he didn't like her accent. "He's logged in," Raji said quietly, pointing to a red blip on the central screen. "External access attempt. Signature matches the back door you warned us about." Preston, the CFO who had betrayed Derek, looked like he was about to be sick. "Audrey, he's going to wipe the drives. We have client data worth billions. You have to cut the connection." "No," Audrey said, her voice steady. "Let him run it." "But," I said, "let him run it." Audrey took a sip of tea. She watched the red progress bar on the screen climb. 20%, 50%, 80%, 100%. "Deletion complete," the screen flashed. Preston gasped. "Oh my God, it's gone. Everything is gone." Audrey turned to Raji. "Raji, execute Protocol Narcissus." Raji typed a single command. Suddenly, the red screens turned a soothing blue. The data that had disappeared popped right back up, fully intact. What just happened?" Preston stammered. "Derek thinks he's a genius," Audrey explained, her eyes cold. "But he's a predictable genius. I knew he would build a back door. Men like him always need an escape hatch. When I updated the code 6 months ago, while he was working late with Bianca, I didn't remove his back door. I encased it." She gestured to the screen. "I built a virtual sandbox around his access point, a fake server. He just deleted a simulation. He destroyed a mirage." "And," Raji added, grinning, "Protocol Narcissus has a secondary function." Back in the internet cafe, Derek was laughing. It was a manic, broken sound. "It's done. It's all gone. Did you see that? Connection terminated." He pounded the table. "She's finished. Winslow Tech is dead." Suddenly, Silas's laptop screen froze. The image of the code vanished, replaced by a single, high-resolution image. It was a live video feed. Derek stopped laughing. He leaned in, squinting. The image was dark, grainy, but he recognized the peeling wallpaper. He recognized the neon sign in the window backward. It was a live feed of them sitting in the booth. "What is that?" Derek whispered. "Silas, what is that?" I don't know." Silas hammered the keys. "I'm locked out. The webcam took control." Then a voice came through the laptop speakers. It wasn't robotic. It was crisp, clear, and terrifyingly familiar. "Hello, Derek." Derek scrambled back, hitting the wall of the booth. "Audrey?" On the screen, the view split. One side showed Derek's terrified face. The other showed Audrey, standing in the command center, looking down at him like a bug under a microscope. "You really thought I wouldn't protect my investment?" Audrey asked. "You just committed a federal cybercrime, Derek. Attempted destruction of corporate property, unauthorized access, and malicious intent. And because you used a backdoor key that is tied to your biometric signature from the old logs, we have positive ID. You set me up," Derek screamed at the laptop. "No, you set yourself up. I just held the door open." Audrey paused, checking her watch. "By the way, that routing through Estonia, it failed. My security protocols reverse-traced the ping in 12 seconds. The Seattle Police Cybercrimes Unit is about 2 minutes away." Silas slammed the laptop shut, shattering the screen. "You crazy psycho! You said this was safe!" Silas grabbed his bag and bolted for the back exit. Derek sat frozen for a second, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Sirens. He heard them. The wail of approaching police cars. Derek scrambled up, slipping on the wet floor. He couldn't go to jail, not him. He was Derek Winslow. He was a visionary. He ran out the back door into the alleyway, knocking over a stack of garbage cans. He sprinted into the rain, the sirens growing louder, the flashing blue lights reflecting off the wet brick walls. He didn't stop running until his lungs burned and his expensive Italian loafers were ruined. He was alone, broke, and hunted. But as he huddled under a bridge, shivering in the cold damp of the Pacific Northwest night, a new thought formed in his mind. A thought darker than anything he had considered before. Audrey had taken his money. She had taken his company. She had taken his dignity. The law couldn't help him now. The courts were rigged by her family's money. If he wanted justice, his version of justice, he would have to take it personally. 3 days later, the Sinclair Winslow Gala was the event of the decade. It was a strategic masterstroke by Audrey. Ostensibly, it was a charity event for underprivileged youth in tech. In reality, it was a coronation. It was Audrey's way of showing the world that Winslow Tech was stable, strong, and under new management. The venue was the Grand Seattle Opera House, a cavernous space of velvet and gold leaf. The press was out in force. Flashbulbs popped like strobes as tech moguls, politicians, and celebrities walked the red carpet. Audrey stood at the top of the grand staircase. She wore a gown of midnight blue silk that seemed to shimmer like liquid. Around her neck was the Sinclair sapphire, a family heirloom worth more than the GDP of a small island nation. Sebastian Cross stood by her side, ever the watchful gargoyle. "Security is tight, Ms. Sinclair," Sebastian murmured, scanning the crowd. "We have facial recognition at every entrance. If Derek tries to get within 500 feet, we'll know." "He's desperate, Sebastian," Audrey said, forcing a smile for a photographer. "Desperate men don't use the front door." Audrey felt a knot of tension in her stomach. Since the incident at the internet cafe, Derek had vanished. The police found his jacket in a dumpster, but the man himself had ghosted. It was uncharacteristic. Derek was loud. He needed attention. His silence was terrifying. Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere was electric. Waiters circulated with champagne. A string quartet played contemporary pop songs. Audrey moved through the room, shaking hands, accepting congratulations. Audrey, darling, the stock is up 12%. Audrey, incredible handling of the transition. She played the part perfectly, the gracious winner. But her eyes never stopped moving, scanning the faces of the waiters, the musicians, the stagehands. At 9:00 p.m. the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the center stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer boomed, "please welcome the chairwoman of Winslow Tech, Audrey Sinclair." Applause thundered. Audrey walked to the podium. She adjusted the microphone. "Thank you," she began, her voice echoing through the hall. 6 years ago, I started a journey. I thought I was building a company. I realized recently that I was actually building a character. The crowd chuckled politely. "We have faced challenges," Audrey continued, "betrayals, but we have emerged stronger. Tonight, I am announcing a new initiative, the open source future. We are releasing the Helios kernel to the public domain." A gasp went through the room. This was unheard of. It was a multi-billion-dollar asset. "Technology belongs to everyone," Audrey said. "Not just the..." Click. The sound system cut out. The spotlight flickered and died, plunging the stage into semi-darkness. Murmurs of confusion rippled through the crowd. Then, a screech of feedback tore through the speakers, making everyone cover their ears. A voice, distorted and booming, filled the opera house. "So generous, Audrey, always giving away things that don't belong to you." Audrey froze. She looked up at the projection screen behind her, which was meant to display the charity logo. Instead, a video began to play. It was shaky, handheld footage. It showed a younger Audrey, looking tired, sitting at a kitchen table covered in bills. Voiceover, Derek. "Look at her, the poor little rich girl playing poverty. She lied to me every day. She lied to you." The image shifted. It was a document, a forged document, but a convincing one. It looked like a medical record. "She didn't tell you about the instability, did she?" Derek's voice sneered from the speakers. "The time she spent in the sanitarium in Switzerland? The Sinclair family secret?" Audrey gripped the podium. It was a lie. She had never been to a sanitarium. She had spent a year in Switzerland, finishing her master's degree. But the document on the screen looked official. He had forged it. He was trying to paint her as mentally incompetent to void the board's vote. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from behind the heavy velvet curtains at the back of the stage. It was Derek. He looked wild. He was wearing a waiter's uniform that was too tight, his hair slicked back with sweat. He held a microphone in one hand and a small black remote in the other. "Stop the music!" Derek shouted, walking toward her. The crowd gasped. Security guards rushed toward the stage, but Derek held up the remote. "I wouldn't do that!" he screamed. "I've rigged the fire suppression system. This remote overrides the safety valves. I press this button, and the halon gas floods this room. It sucks the oxygen out in 30 seconds. We all sleep. Permanently." The guards froze. Sebastian held up a hand, signaling them to stand down. Audrey didn't back away. She stood her ground. "Derek," she said, her voice projecting, even without the mic, cutting through the silence of the terrified room. "This is over. Put the remote down." "It's over when I say it's over." Derek paced the stage, looking out at the elite of Seattle. "You all think she's a savior? She's a fraud. She stole my company. She stole my life." He turned to Audrey, his eyes brimming with tears of rage. "Admit it, Audrey. Admit you manipulated me. Admit you used your daddy's money to crush me because I didn't want you anymore." Audrey looked at him. She saw the man she had loved. She saw the fear beneath the anger. But she also saw the danger. He had completely broken with reality. "I didn't use my father's money to crush you, Derek," she said, stepping closer, ignoring Sebastian's hissed warning. I used my own intelligence to stop you from destroying yourself, but you were determined to do it anyway. Liar! Derek raised the remote. I want my company back. Sign it over, right now, or I push this button. Derek, there is no gas, Audrey said calmly. Derek blinked. What? The fire suppression system, Audrey said. I had it replaced yesterday. We upgraded to a water mist system. The Halon tanks are gone. Derek looked at the remote in his hand. He looked at the ceiling vents. You micromanage the fire system? I micromanage everything, Audrey said. That's why I'm the CEO and you're a waiter. Derek let out a roar of pure frustration. He threw the remote at her. It missed, clattering harmlessly off the podium. He lunged. He wasn't going for the crowd. He was going for her throat. But before he could reach her, a shadow moved. Sebastian Cross didn't look like a fighter, but he moved with the speed of a viper. He vaulted onto the stage, intercepted Derek mid-stride, and used the man's own momentum to flip him. Derek hit the stage floor with a sickening thud. Before he could scramble up, Sebastian had a knee on his back, and his arm twisted at a painful angle. Stay down, Mr. Winslow, Sebastian said, his voice barely elevated. You are making a scene. The police, who had been waiting in the wings, swarmed the stage. They hauled a screaming, kicking Derek to his feet. I'm Derek Winslow, he shouted as they dragged him away, his voice cracking. I'm a visionary. She's the witch. She's the villain. Audrey watched him go. The man she had wasted 6 years on. He didn't look like a monster anymore. He just looked pathetic. The ballroom was dead silent. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on her. Audrey straightened her dress. She walked back to the podium. She signaled for the sound technician to cut the feed. I apologize for the interruption, she said into the live microphone. Her voice wavered slightly, then firmed up. As I was saying, the future is open source, because transparency exposes everything, even the truth. The crowd hesitated for a second. Then one person started clapping, then another. Soon the entire opera house was on its feet, a thunderous ovation washing over her. But Audrey didn't smile. She looked at the empty spot on the stage where Derek had been pinned. The battle was won, but the war had left scars that money, even Sinclair money, couldn't heal. She walked off the stage, past the cheering crowds, into the quiet of the backstage corridor. She needed air. She needed to breathe. But as she pushed open the rear exit door into the cool night air, she found someone waiting for her. It wasn't the police. It wasn't Sebastian. It was an older woman, elegant, wearing a coat that cost more than Derek's entire life. She was leaning against a silver Rolls-Royce. Hello, Audrey, the woman said. Audrey froze. Mother? Victoria Sinclair stubbed out a thin cigarette. That was quite a show, darling. Your father and I were watching the live stream. We think it's time you stopped playing shopkeeper and came home. The real work is about to begin. Victoria Sinclair didn't wait for an answer. She opened the rear door of the Rolls-Royce, revealing an interior of cream leather and cut crystal. The board in New York is restless, Audrey, Victoria said, her voice sharp as a razor. They watched the live stream. They saw you handle that lunatic with the water mist and the calm of a surgeon. They don't want you playing with tech startups in Seattle anymore. Winslow Tech is a toy. Sinclair Vanguard is the world. Audrey looked back at the opera house. The police lights were still flashing, a chaotic disco of red and blue. She had destroyed Derek. She had stripped him of his company, his reputation, and his freedom. But standing there, facing the mother she had run away from 10 years ago, Audrey realized the fight with Derek had just been a warm-up. I'm not coming back to be your silent heiress, Mother, Audrey said, her voice low. I'm not coming back to marry some oil baron you picked out to merge portfolios. Victoria raised an eyebrow. Then why would you come back? Because I'm not the runaway daughter anymore, Audrey said, stepping forward. I'm the woman who just hostile took over a billion-dollar company in 3 days. If I come back to New York, I take the chair. I run the conglomerate. And Sebastian answers to me, not you. Silence stretched between them, heavy with rain and ambition. Then Victoria smiled. It wasn't a warm smile, but it was a respectful one. I was hoping you'd say that. Get in, Madam Chairwoman. Audrey slid into the car. As the heavy door thudded shut, sealing out the noise of the sirens and the city, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the darkened window. She didn't look like Audrey Keating, the waitress. She didn't even look like Audrey Winslow, the wife. She looked like a Sinclair. Somewhere in a cold holding cell at the precinct, Derek Winslow was screaming at a public defender, demanding a phone call that no one would answer. He had wanted a trophy wife to put on a shelf. Instead, he had woken up a sleeping dragon. As the Rolls-Royce dissolved into the rainy night, heading toward the private airfield, Audrey didn't look back. The past was a bad investment. She was only interested in the future. Wow, what a roller coaster. Talk about instant karma. Derek thought he could toss Audrey aside like yesterday's trash, but he forgot the golden rule. Never underestimate the person who helped you build your throne. He wanted a divorce, but he ended up with a life sentence of regret. Audrey didn't just win the court case, she won the entire game. If you loved this story of satisfying revenge and hidden identities, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets us know you want more billionaire drama. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new story. We post new episodes every single day. Now, I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think Audrey was too harsh on Derek, or did he get exactly what he deserved? And what would you do if you found out your partner was hiding $1 billion secret? Let me know down below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.